with that, so a lot has been going on in the world, right? I mean, how to make sense of it, and at the end of the day, do you even need to make sense of it, right? Um, as I was sitting with what we were going to be speaking about today, for those of you that follow sort of our website and it says what the next Sunday talk is going to be about, it was titled, well, I don't even know the title, but the description was something about suffering or joy. It's your choice. And I really couldn't connect with that as I looked out into the world because I've been suffering. Any of you been suffering in the last couple of days? Any of you been shedding some tears maybe, feeling some sadness, feeling confusion? It's been a part of my my experience this week, and I couldn't come up here and tell you that it was your choice or my choice to suffer or not. Because quite frankly, I don't know if I see it as a choice in this moment because I'm so in it. What I do realize is that there is a choice. And what I want to share with you is what I have come to understand. And I feel like it's part of what I have continued to evolve more into, which is suffering is just a part of life, for me at least. Suffering and being so connected to what is happening in the world outside of me can bring suffering. The choice that I have, though, is what I do with that suffering. You see, we've been studying the Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz as part of our fall small group program, Spirit Groups. And in it, it really talks about the ways in which we have been imprisoned by our own suffering. And how we are able to then, when we become aware of just how that suffering, those wounds that run so deep within us individually and collectively as a human family are showing up, how we don't have to necessarily respond or react from that place. How we are able to actually acknowledge that suffering, that hurt, that pain, that anger, and move beyond it. So for me, more importantly than getting up here and telling you that we just can choose to be happy in this moment, is I can stand here and authentically tell you, I can choose what I do with that suffering. And I believe that you, by being here at Unity on the Bay in this very moment, actually, I believe that humanity, by the fact that we are the ones experiencing what is going on in the world, are equipped to transform that suffering, to make better choices out of that suffering. The Toltec wisdom that Don Miguel Ruiz shares actually speaks about the fact that death itself can teach us about liberation, about freedom. And so what we are experiencing in the human collective can be used to bring us into a deeper sense of what freedom actually can feel and be for us if we take this opportunity, if we allow ourselves to really venture into it unapologetically, to really venture into it authentically without necessarily judging whatever is happening within us in this moment, and really just beginning to use it to allow us to rise in consciousness. I like to look for signs, and so as I heard about what happened at the synagogue yesterday, and by the way, it was the synagogue yesterday morning. I know people in our own community actually were sharing on Facebook that they had seen the van of the bomber that sent those 13 bombs around, and it was from South Florida. So I know that there's even a connection in that. There's 2 black individuals who were killed outside of a supermarket this past week simply because they were black. And so these are some of the things that are happening in our human experience in our community, and what we're able to do with it really allows us to see it as just an unfortunate event or what wakes us up, what moves us. We're in a place where I know, since we're here, the Toltec wisdom talks about the different masteries that we can move into. And the first one is the mastery of awareness. Love the mastery of awareness. Love the tools that we teach to become aware of the fact that we are the ones that can liberate ourselves from this old dream, old paradigm, and move ourselves into a new dream. Love that we can teach tools that whenever we're feeling hurt or sad or upset, we can notice those thoughts, and let's just assume that we've mastered it. Let us just assume that we have become as aware as we need to become aware to now move into the mastery of transformation, to really be able to do something with that awareness. Not simply enough to say, oh yeah, I had a negative thought. What are we going to do about that thought? Oh yeah, I had a moment of anger. What are we going to do with that moment of anger? And it could be those big things that I've just shared, or I was at Legoland with family yesterday, in the midst of everything going on with that in my mind, but also trying to enjoy myself, and some woman just pushed me out of the line. And what did I do in that moment? I mean, as little as that seems compared to what is going on in the world, it is all a part of that old dream. It is all part of that old paradigm that it is time for us to transform. It is time for us to do something with. So I looked for signs, and I saw that, the synagogue is called Tree of Life, right? And so that rang a bell, and I like my Genesis stories, and so I go back to it. And in my mind, the Tree of Life was the tree of knowledge. And just so you know, to be completely open, there are some scholars that say it's the same tree, some scholars that say it's not. But for me, it had always been the same tree, the tree of knowledge, where Eve and Adam ate the first bite of that apple from, right? And in Christianity, that has been used as the story that tells us why, what? We're not worthy. We're not good enough. We're sinners, right? We are disconnected. Metaphysically speaking, though, it's a story that I've really gone into because for me, metaphysically, it means when we first felt like we were disconnected from oneness, from God. That first thought that we were separate from. And whether it's through traditional Christianity or looking at it metaphysically, that tree of life is where the suffering, or what happened around it, where suffering first began. For if we really look at the suffering that we may be going through, all of it has its genesis on feeling like we're separate from each other, separate from God. And so what does it say that this happened at Tree of Life? Can we then use this as not only looking at it as the genesis of all suffering, but actually now the genesis of us healing from all that suffering? Can we redefine it? Can we move into seeing it in a different light? No longer being imprisoned by our own suffering, and since we're connected, no longer being imprisoned by other people's suffering. Because isn't that what we're also talking about, right? It's not just our suffering, but it's other people's sufferings and how that suffering is acted out, and then how that relates to me and what that brings up for me. I mean, how many of you realize that the bomber or the person that went into the synagogue was suffering? I know that it feels uncomfortable to even sometimes go there because we have been conditioned to not want to acknowledge the suffering of somebody that makes us suffer. How many of us can acknowledge that that bomber was suffering? That racist in the supermarket was suffering. And so suffering is a part of our human condition. It's a part of our human family. What are we willing to do with it in this moment? Are we willing to liberate ourselves from our own suffering and liberate ourselves from the suffering of others? How many of you have heard that quote by Marianne Williamson? Begins with, our biggest fear is not that we're inadequate. Our biggest fear is that we're powerful beyond measure. Right? People have heard that one? Well, the last part of that quote that sometimes doesn't get a lot of attention is this: as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, as we are liberated from our own suffering, our presence automatically liberates others. Are we willing to make this the day that we liberate ourselves and humanity from the old dream, the old paradigm. Don Miguel Ruiz in the book actually says, forget everything that you have learned in your whole life. This is the beginning of a new understanding, a new paradigm. The only thing that's missing from that quote is if you choose for it to be. And that is the choice that we have before us. So we are moving through the mastery of awareness. We are really looking at the ways in which we are being called into a new dream, a new reality, and the ways in which we do that can really change and shift the world. You know, it's an addiction, and Don Miguel Ruiz in his book talks about it being an addiction. He says, we are addicted to anger, jealousy, and self-pity. Do any of you sometimes feel like you're just addicted to all those things? It just shows up, right? Like all of a sudden you may be doing something, you may be experiencing something, and it just shows up, and all of a sudden you feel attached to feeling that pain, to feeling that anger. He says we are addicted to the beliefs that tell us, I'm not good enough, I'm not intelligent enough, why even try? Other people will do it because they're better than me. We don't want to acknowledge it sometimes, but that is the story that is running through our minds every so often, right? And even this part where I'm not good enough, I'm not intelligent, why even try? I personally perceive it, I may be wrong, but I personally perceive it in also the ways in which sometimes we just think that these issues are too big, right? Racism is too big of an issue. Violence is too big of an issue. Who am I to try? Somebody's smarter, somebody's better, somebody's more loving, somebody's more caring, somebody is more aware, somebody has transformed more, so maybe it should be on them, not on me. Well, who are you not? We are all children of God. We are all children of light, and that light is being expressed through and as us. If not us, who? This moment is asking for us to actually just answer, this is the time, and I'm the one to be a part of it. As addicts will tell you, and have told me, you can't let go of an addiction, though, until you've hit rock bottom. The question is, will you make this your rock bottom? Will you make this the moment that you seek help for these addictions? And not only speak those words of wanting to let it go, but really move into, as Kelsey was doing, right? Like not only speaking and singing love, but really feeling and moving and allowing it to be expressed through him as love. An action of injustice opens up a wound in the mind, and we react with emotional poison. Does that sound familiar? Maybe it happened to some of you. It happened to me when I was going through my mind through all the things that were happening this week. And we react with emotional poison because of the concepts and beliefs we have about injustice and what is fair, all based on our belief systems. So now that we're aware that there is a new paradigm that is being asked to be not only envisioned, but to step more fully into, what is it that we're going to use to transform that? What are the new belief systems? What are the new ways of thinking and being out into the world? You know, this is what is all over the Bible and all over the sacred text, right? You know, this is what Paul would say, be renewed, be enlightened by the renewing of your mind. This is what Jesus talks about in talking about bringing wine into new wineskins. We have to really own this new way of being, and we have to really own the belief systems that will move us into that new way of being. At some point, we chose to be an addict to these things because it felt good. I mean, think about it. The first time somebody wronged you and you were able to snap back, instant gratification, right? But then somebody else snapped at us, snapped back, a little bit more instant gratification. But then we started realizing that it became part of our way of being, and all of a sudden, like any addiction, what once gave us gratification is actually what is hurting us, what is bringing us into mental and spiritual and even body, I can't even, just the breaking down of those things. And so this is the opportunity to move further into transformation. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 22 through 24 says, "You were taught to put away your former way of life, your old self, corrupt and deluded by its lust, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to clothe yourself with the new self, created according to the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness." It doesn't say we're going to be taught that. It says you have been taught. You've already been taught. Now you've got to live it, because now as we move from that mastery of transformation, we really have to move into the mastery of intent. Is it our intention to really live this way? Whatever it is that is going to bring you to this new dream, whether it's the 4 agreements that Don Miguel Ruiz talks about, to be impeccable with our word, to not take things personally, to not make assumptions, to always do your best. If it's the 5 unity principles, God is all there is. We are an expression of God. We create our experience by our thinking, prayer, and meditation, and the power it brings to us. Or it's not enough to know these things. We have to actually live them. Whatever these teachings and whatever religion that you create for yourself, let it be one that actually moves you into that mastery of intent, the mastery of what he also calls love, because it is love that actually is going to move us to transform and to be intentional about the ways in which we respond in the world. I wish I could tell you that when that woman pushed me out of line yesterday, I had the forthright to actually ask the question, what would love do now? I didn't. Oh, was that a little too honest there? And I'm grateful that I am able to look at it now and hope and pray that next time my actions reflect what is within my heart that I want to reflect, that I'm more intentional about the ways in which love is in action through and as me. And that really is what this is all about, being love in action. In anything, whether it's opening a door for somebody, whether it's not reacting from the place of suffering and hurt and pain, whether it's even loving ourselves enough to recognize that we have been wounded. You know, you can't heal something that you're not willing to actually say needs healing. So can we be love in action for ourselves to work through all of that healing and support others in healing also? I don't know what that looks like for each of you, right? I know what it looks like for me. I didn't do this at the other service, but I'm gonna share because I've been working on with the Absolute Abundance advanced class. We've been working on our purpose statement. I'm very clear about my purpose: to boldly and passionately awaken the human family. What is your purpose? How does your purpose show up as love in action in the world? That is only something you can answer for yourself, but guess what? The world is waiting for you to answer it. I'm here to support you in answering that question, but I'm also here to let you know that the world is waiting for you to answer that question. I went to the website of Tree of Life, and the rabbi there has actually been blogging. And just a few weeks ago, he blogged about the flood, the Great Flood, right? So in the old Hebrew scriptures, in the Old Testament, as Christians would call it, the idea of Noah and the flood. People familiar with it, right? There was all this chaos going on in the world, and God didn't know how to clean it up, so he just sent 40 days of rain and 40 nights of rain and cleaned up the mess, right? But then said something, that he wouldn't do it again. And so if we need a flood in this moment to actually clean and purify that which is coming through us or that which is coming through humanity, whose responsibility is it but ours? And what he talks about in his blog, which again was just weeks before his synagogue was entered into this Saturday by that madman or that shooter, he talked about a flood of love. And at the end, he says, so many people shrug their shoulders and feel helpless, unable to see hope for a brighter future as a possibility. Get involved. Put love into action. Find that something that moves you. You might be surprised to find others who think the same way. All is not lost unless we just give up, and that is just not an option. Flood the earth to cleanse it and to purify Are we willing to be, like there's all this talk of a wave. I'm not even going to mention the color of the wave, but there's all this talk of a wave. Go beyond the wave. Are we ready to flood the world with love? Are we ready to flood the world with a belief in our own humanity and our own divinity and the divinity of all the people that are around us? Are we willing to be that flood that finally cleans that wound, heals it, and allows us to live a world hand in hand that works for all? Again, I say, you're here by divine appointment. We are in this human experience because we were meant to be in this human experience, to experience this because we are the ones that are qualified and being called to shift it. Will you shift it with me? Yeah. Will you look at the ways in which we can flood the earth with all that we value, all that we believe, and all that we truly are that rises from us? So it's done. Now, let's really, really live it. Thank you, and amen.